It is a grand day today, and St. John Paul II expressed his desire that this should be also an occasion for reflection on the priesthood and on an effort for the sanctification of the priesthood throughout the world. Hence it is probably that also this octave of Corpus Christi culminating in this moment of prayer around the priesthood and around the heart of our God, which is its origin, is probably why we're here at this moment in time. So we do well to reflect on the invitation that we have to intimacy with the heart of our God. If there is no intimacy, then we are simply machines, and there are plenty of machines in the church. Now, the devotion to the Sacred Heart has come through in stages, as we know. We have this question from St. Margaret Mary Alacoque to the Lord himself, why he had not shown all this to the beloved disciple, and apparently the answer was that he was reserving it for the last times. And it hasn't finished there, because as we know, through the providential impetus of St. John Paul II, who was of course from the same area as Blessed and then St. Faustina, that also has come to the fore. Indeed, the full desire of the Sacred Heart has come into place in the life of the Church, and it has taken off on the first Sunday after Easter, expressing this form of his love for us in the form specifically of his mercy, which is his greatest attribute. He himself teaches that. And it's also that which must characterize us as being his expression on earth. For the goodness of other people, we must always be beings of mercy. We meet people there where they are at. The word mercy in Latin, misericordia, is that looking at the heart, and from the heart at the misery of a person, taking a person into pity through compassion coming from the heart. It has to be personal and loving, and not just condescending. There's a big difference between the two. In the account of the death of our Lord, we have this insistence that John, the beloved disciple, has seen what he is reporting. It is quite clear from the very words that he puts here. And we have this coming in, that the heart was pierced. And tradition has it that it was Longinus who pierced this heart, and that he eventually became a Christian. I forget the details afterwards, he may well have become a bishop or a martyr, but what we do know is that through some providential coincidence, the church dedicated, I believe, to him at Lanciano in the south of Italy, I think it's linked with that name, is the one where the Lord chose to show precisely the mercy and love of his heart and his humanity, linked to his divinity. We know by now far more than in times past certain things about that miracle. It goes right back to the time, of course, when the church was one, east and west, and there was a certain to-ing and fro-ing between priests. He was a Brazilian priest anyway, but he was celebrating in the western rite down there. In the south of Italy, there's still actually an eastern presence within the Catholic Church, the old Magna Grecia, which used to be down there. Anyway, this miracle happened, and it was of the Eucharistic miracles the category A, if you like, because there are different degrees of miracle, but this was the maximum. And there, of course, in the 70s, we had this permission of ecclesiastical authority to analyze it, and it was done, and the professor who did it is still alive. And it is interesting what he was coming out with. We'll keep that for a moment in the box. And then, recently, when actually President Pope was down there in Argentina, wasn't he? He was down there. It happened in his diocese that for a quite different reason, actually, there was a Eucharistic miracle. In that case, it was a host that had fallen to the ground, and it was placed in water rather than consumed and placed in the tabernacle. But then it didn't stop there. It began, first of all, to change colour, and eventually it became, obviously, flesh and blood. So it was, again, with ecclesiastical authority, his own, I presume, as Archbishop down there, examined. by an independent team, and actually it was sent to New York, I believe. It was certainly sent far away from where it was, without explanation of what it was, and a part of it anyway. And they came back puzzled. This just could not be, the person was alive, and so on and so forth. But then there were things coming out as regards the blood group and so on. And there was one detail, it was this. There was something not normal. The DNA code had one bit missing. It was something which could only be explained if there was not a father, a human father involved. Now, when the results of this were reported to the other professor, by now of a certain age, who was still alive, in Compos Mentis, who had done it there for the one of Lanciano, he straight away came up, "It's the same man! It was stesso uomo." He knew perfectly well, this is the same exactly. About 50 years later, or 40, and so then of course they wanted to get further, and they wanted to get to the Holy Shroud of Turin, to get blood samples from there, and I believe it's been done since, and they have found it's exactly the same problem. The DNA has exactly the same problem, and also things related have come to the surface. The same data have come to the surface each time that, for instance, there is a blood group rare in Europe, but very common in the Middle East and so on, and also that is the tissue, that of myocardial tissue around the heart. Now that, you see, is interesting, coming from Lanciano, where it's linked with the piercing of the heart. And we have there an indication that the Eucharist is, in some way, directly, we don't quite know how to understand it, but it's the very essence of the humanity of our God. It is His love. So this feast is also a Eucharistic feast in that sense. We're handling that love every time. And the series of other curious miracles at Lanciano is also something which has puzzled scientists ever since, because they're in different coagulated blobs, about 5 of them, the blood, and if you weigh each one separately, it comes to a certain weight, each one separately, and if one weighs them together, it comes to the same weight. In other words, it's juggling with the laws of nature and physics. So again, God is there showing that here we're outside our normal zone. It's the domain of God, and we must never forget that, because normally we don't see things. And yet, a soul somehow in tuned, calm and quiet and prepared, does pick things up. We are aware of a presence, and the more refined the soul is, the more gentle and neat is, like the Sacred Heart, then the more it does sort of pick up things. So it's important that we enter into that word every time we come to the altar. I remember the instinct there, which I picked up as a novice in the Carthusians, which I saw always carried out, that every priest before he celebrated went into this position. I'll just give you a demonstration, because that's the bit that you'll remember. You see, the altar was there, and then the priest would be in this position before he celebrated. He'd have one thing there, he'd be leaning against the step of the altar like that for a while, in mode of littleness and nothingness. So he came not just crashing in, you see, there was that mode of entry, and then also part of the Carthusian rite, he would then, with ritual, wash his hands, and so on. And then afterwards, when it was over, the same thing. Well, actually, if it was the conventional Mass, everyone would make Thanksgiving together. Actually, everyone would be prostrate after the elevation of the host. But that's not the Carthusian rite. But anyway, with regard to the Thanksgiving, that same position was taken up again. And then with the low Masses, because there was not consecration on a weekday in the Charterhouse, it was an individual one. So a novice would be next to a celebrant, novice master or some other priest there. And again, that same thing would happen there. For about 10 minutes, the priest, novice master, whatever, would be there in the middle on the altar step in that position, and his servant, the novice or whatever, the junior, would be in the same position next to him. Again, the maximum use of the grace of the presence. It was therefore a lot, if you like, depends on us as regards the fruit. It's not the same thing to rush from the sacristy having taught and to go away straight away into a mode of talking in the sacristy. And that happens a lot nowadays. We must somehow try to protect the sacred and educate the people. In parenthesis, I remember one time when I was there in formation, because they broke the night every night, you see, in the charter house was asleep there. So they might be a bit drowsy when it came to this postration, you know, the novice master. Off he was, you know, but a roll over, you know, just think I am sleeping. Anyway, the point is, it was normally a very quiet mode and nothing would disturb the peace. So unfortunately, we're up against it when we're involved with people, because you see, they haven't got at all that mentality. In fact, now what's happening is the church itself has become a place of encounter. It's rather a pity, because the Lord doesn't want that. In fact, Jacinta Fatima insisted on that before dying. She knew that the Lord was not pleased with this, and she was given this message, obviously. This question, we must protect also even the Blessed Sacrament when it's there in the tabernacle. Now, it's not easy, but there are actually ways and means of doing that. One can, if one wants to, and if one finds a certain number of people of goodwill in the parish, somehow sacralize the moments immediately preceding the celebration. On a weekday it might be the rosary. There are different ways of actually getting them somehow into mode. A bit of ingenuity. It's not that impossible if one really wants to. Or it can be gentle organ music, for instance. There are ways and means of creating an atmosphere, and also now and again of, why not, actually going into the ambo oneself as a priest who has a certain influence and explaining, look, this is a silent moment, you're not often alone with your thoughts. On that level, they would take it seriously. I remember in school, we had a very good headmaster. He was a practicing Christian, and he would deliberately, in the morning assembly, because that's obligatory in our places, they have to start off with prayer, he would himself, before the others, be there in his gown, sitting there in his presidential place on the stage. And then they'd come in from different classrooms, and he'd be there, and the very fact of sitting there, just quietly, obliged everyone to do the same. Now, if they see a priest praying at the altar, they will instinctively down. They will. It's not any violent way, but the message gets through. And he also, I remember one day, did say, these morning assemblies are important, because he was saying, there are very few times in your day when you are alone with your thoughts. And he was speaking there to people of 13 years old and so on, and the message was a mature message, and he was right, and no one laughed. It's true that we're always going to, and even more now, going through life talking to each other. So he got that message across, and the morning assembly was well done. These things matter. Children, they don't necessarily scoff if they see an adult really taking it seriously. They will if the adult doesn't take it seriously. So, this is our God. Now, this element of scoffing at the Lord, which is what they were doing at the foot of the cross, is something that might also attack us. There is a demonic attack against the priesthood in our day, and it's actually using the best and most efficacious means to make it function, the modern media. So, sometimes in some cultures one might be offended just for wearing that collar. One must be prepared for that. But one must never answer back in the same mode. Jesus autem taceva, the Lord was silent. True dignity shows its dignity by not basing its happiness on that. It doesn't matter what people think of us, especially if we have the glory of suffering for Christ. If, on the other hand, we reply, we show that we are judged by them and feel so. We don't have that supernatural vision of things. As I say, the true reaction should be that of compassion. That person obviously is not happy. If he were, he would not cause unhappiness or wish to. Now, this element, therefore, that we are in a society by now where actually satanic forces are apparently triumphant, but they're not. And people out there, say what you like, can't get away from the issue. They're trying to block it out, but they can't. And what's happening, as we know, is that from youth onwards, they're making sure that the issue is never addressed. They're full of anything which takes them away from contact with their deepest self. And to do so, they're increasing the dose of impulse and excitement by whatever means it is, each time stronger, and therefore each time more empty at the end. So they're profoundly unhappy, profoundly unhappy. So therefore, we as priests are dealing with people who are profoundly unhappy. And if they find joy and some kind of hope, perhaps we will be surprised. Now, in certain societies, it is fashionable to dismiss completely religion. As I say, I've been pleasantly surprised to find that the poor are quite the contrary. They have their sin, but they have their openness. But the rich, not always of course, but the sophisticated and well-educated are independent and self-sufficient. It's very hard to get through. Now we have so many cases. This caught my eye by chance. It's the kind of situation that was frequent when the church was being dismantled before, in the time of the French Revolution, which obviously was of satanic inspiration. It's been wave after wave. Later on, it was the Freemasons working at the beginning of the expulsions at the beginning of the 1900s in France. And do you know that we know from the inside story that very strange things were going on in the realm of the intervention of the sinister forces, because humanly speaking, certain things cannot be explained. One cannot explain the success of communism, for instance, in a short time just by ascribing it to human forces. There's more to it than meets the eye. Well, so too, in a country massively Catholic like France, what happened in a short time, the expulsion of all the religious nearly and so on, all that was directly demonic. And we know, for instance, that this happened. A Dominican went to his superiors and to the bishop to get the necessary permission to infiltrate in some way what was going on. And so he had a contact, and he was able to do that. And he was present at one of these sessions in one of the big lodges in Paris, I presume. Must have been the Grand Orient. And there he was, hidden, present, apparently with the others, but he came to a certain point, and this gentleman appeared and started talking to them. And the friend, his next one there in his ear said, "It's him." It was Lucifer himself taking on human form. When that happens, by the way, there's always something which isn't perfect, a feat or something, but he can do what he wants to. And he was telling them the next step, how to go about it. So that was what was happening at that stage. And therefore, this norm of intellectuals in the air who have control, therefore think they have also the norm as regards what they can transmit. It's happening in our time. But it was happening at this time in France. But as I say, each one, in the last resort, can only get over the problem by blocking it out. And this was a good example of what happened there at the time in the French army. As you know, Napoleon made a mistake which was later to be repeated in military history by Hitler. They took on Russia and the Russian winter. In Russia, shortly before the horrible military campaign between Napoleon and Russia in 1812, two high-ranking military men, one a count, often these posh people, and the military governor of Moscow, and the other a general, were scoffing over drinks about the existence of God. Now that's not the first time we've heard that. Scoffing about the existence of God, life after death, and hell. People just nowadays just say, oh, well, we presume that if a person has lived a good life, they'll be okay. Well, you see, that comes through also then in church life. No matter who we're burying, we're beatifying them. And it's not giving a good message, including suicides, they're all beatified. It's not the best way to handle this situation of, look, it's a serious business getting to heaven. It's not automatic at all. We don't frighten people, but they have to be told at some point it's not automatic. Otherwise, Mother Teresa has the same recompense as Hitler. It just doesn't make sense. I mean, there's bound to be some kind of equilibrium in the universe. Common sense will tell you that. Even a child will tell you that. So here we are. These people who had it all in this world were scoffing over drinks about the existence of God, life after death, and hell. They made a mocking pledge of honor. These military people, because often the officers weren't the ones to die, but the ordinary soldiers, but however they could die and they knew it. If there were a hell, the first there would come to inform the other of it. A few weeks later, the general departed for the front. One morning, while the count was in bed, the general suddenly appeared before him, pale, with his right hand on his breast, declaring, "What do we do now? There is a hell, and I am there. What do we do now?" And disappeared. The Count ran to his friends, eyes wild, hair all over the place, and exclaimed what had just happened. Now remember, at this point nothing was known because news travelled slowly. 2 weeks later, word was received in Moscow that the general had died in battle. On the same day, and at the very hour, he appeared to the Count. And also we know this detail that they had been killed with a bullet or whatever it was in that part of the body. He had kept his word of honour. Hell exists. Now, let's just remember that, because these things are never spoken about in public. In retreat one can, because one is there facing what we're here for, and they have to be handled in retreat. That is, it's a serious business, our existence on earth, and it's because certain things aren't handled actually in retreat that priests then get more of the same thing in retreat. And it's not exactly what the Lord wants, because we know that the Holy Spirit is very much at work in retreats, especially retreats of consecrated souls, and especially of priests actually. Why? Because we're directly linked with the Blessed Trinity. So he wants us to be thinking about serious things in these holy moments, which fabricate, if you like, the direction of our life, for the good of souls. And just also to be aware that the favourite trick of the devil in our day is to make sure that people are busy, priests included. And what is happening is that people are, even at an early age, persuaded that the real important issues are, for instance, success in whatever field it might be. Often it's academic success or sport success. But it's a different form of what has always been there. Near me in Ireland, I have in Drogheda a museum which goes back to military times. It was a military base. And there you have, amongst many things, a nearly, I think they are actually life-size, kind of wax effigy of two posh men, noblemen, really, dressed as they were at the period. And it all explains what's going on. They're about to settle, wait for it, the point of honour. The point of honour. So you know what that meant. First of all, they had the choice, which instrument, sword or pistol. And then they had one chance. If it was a pistol, they had one chance. So it was done at 6 o'clock in the morning, the whole ritual. There had to be a referee. And they would walk, I forget whether it was 12 paces, I forget now, 10 or 12, whatever it was, starting at the same time. On we go. Then, when the signal was given, and then we had one chance. But you see what was going on there. Honour, understood as such, was all that mattered to those people, and many of them going into the beyond in that state of mind. Now, what is life about? What is honour? What is success? What is gaining, winning? And people are going through life on a massive scale, mistaking the issue. Now, it's just for us to be aware, if they don't get the true message from us, from whom will they ever get?